We are on practice 3C, page 63 of the text. We're starting with numbers 1 through 4, part A only of those. I've written the problems here, and I've written them vertically because I think it's easier, but you don't have to solve them vertically. The first one is 2 2/3 plus 1 5/9. So we want to start by making sure our fractional parts have the same denominator. So we have 3 and we have 9. The lowest common multiple of 3 and 9 is 9, so we can use 9. So the 2/3 is going to become 6/9, and I already wrote that over here, because 3 times 3 is 9, and 2 times 3 is 6. So now we can add. We first add our whole number components. 2 plus 1 is 3. Then we add our fractional components. 6/9 plus 5/9 is 11/9. Now we see that this part is an improper fraction, so we want to pull out or extract the whole number from that. 9/9 would make a whole. So we pull that out, we have another whole, we can add it to the 3 and we get 4, and then we're left with 2 extra ninths, because 11 minus 9 is 2. So the answer is 4 2/9. On number 2, we are subtracting. Again, we want to make sure our fractional parts have like denominators so that we can subtract. We have 6 and we have thirds. If we switch them both to 6, we will have a common denominator. So this 1/3 becomes 2/6. All I did is multiply the numerator and denominator both by 2. So now I can subtract. I can subtract my whole numbers. 3 minus 1 is 2, and then the 5/6 minus the 2/6 is 3/6, which can be simplified to 1/2. So our final answer is 2.5. Number 3, our fractional components, we have ninths and 6. We need a common denominator. I know that 18 would work, because 18 is a multiple of both 9 and 6. So I want to rewrite each of them as 18ths. The 2/9 will become 4/19, because 9 times 2 is 18, 2 times 2 is 4. And the 1/6 becomes 3/18, because 6 times 3 is 18, so 1 times 3 is 3. Now I can just add. I add my whole numbers. 3 plus 1 is 4, and then I add my fractional parts. 4/18 plus 3/18 is 7/18. That cannot be simplified, so that's my final answer. Now we're on to number 4. This one is a little more complicated, and we'll see why in a second. First, let's make common denominators. So we have 6 thirds. We want to use 6. So 1/6 can stay as it is. The 2/3 becomes 4/6. So here's where it gets complicated. 1/6 minus 4/6. That would be a negative number, so we don't want to do that. We want to take a whole from this 4 and turn it into a fraction so that we can make an improper fraction to then subtract the 4/6 from. So we take 1 out of this 4. The 4 becomes 3. And then that 1 that we took out is 6/6. So we add that to the 1/6 and we get 7/6. Now we can subtract, because now our fractional part of our first number is greater than the fractional part of the second number. So we subtract our whole numbers. 3 minus 1 is 2. And then we have 7/6 minus 4/6 is 3/6. 3/6 is 1/2. So we get 2 1/2. Now we have some story problems to do. Let's look at number 5. Robert jogged 1 2/5 kilometer. His brother jogged 2.5 kilometers. Who jogged the longer distance and how much longer? Well, we know that his brother went more because he was at 2.5 and Robert was only at 1 2/5. So to find the difference, we just need to subtract. So we need to take the 2 1/2 minus the 1 2/5. So We need like denominators for our fractional parts. We have 2 and 5, so let's use 10. 1/2 becomes 5/10, and the 2/5 becomes 4/10. I just multiplied numerator and denominator by 2 to get 4/10. Now I can subtract. The 2 minus the 1 is the 1. 5/10 minus 4/10 is 1/10. So his brother jogged 1 1/10 kilometer more than Robert. So the answer would be his brother jogged more, and he jogged 1 1/10 kilometers more. Number 7 says a container has a capacity of 3 liters. I'm just going to draw a container here. So let's say it can go up to 3 liters. It contains 1 3/4 liter of water. So, like here, it contains 1 3/4 liter. How much more water is needed to fill it completely? So, how much more water? Now I can do this in my head. I'll do that first, and then I'll illustrate how to work it out if you can't do it in your head. I know that 1 3/4, if I add another fourth, I'm up to 2 liters, because 3/4 plus 1/4 would be 4/4. So if I add another fourth, I'm up to 2, and then I just need to go 1 more to get from 2 to 3. So I know that I need 1 1/4 liter to fill it, just by reasoning it out. If you can't do that in your head, then you can subtract. You're just saying 3 minus 1 3/4. So here, as fractional part here, it's non-existent. We can't subtract the 3/4, so we need to take one of the wholes from the 3, make it a 2, and 4/4. So 3 is the same as 2 4/4, because 4/4 is just 1. So 2 and 1 is 3. So then I can subtract. 2 minus 1 is 1. 4/4 minus 3/4 is 1/4. So I just solved it using fraction subtraction, basically, but it was pretty easy to just reason out as well. Number 9, the total length of 2 ribbons is 2 3/4 meter. If one ribbon is 1 1/3 meters long, what is the length of the other ribbon? So if the total is 2 3/4 and one of them is 1 1/3, we can just subtract to find the other ribbon. So we take 2 3/4 and we subtract 1 1/3. We need like denominators so that we can subtract our fractional part. We are starting with 4 and 3 as our denominators. So hopefully you will think of 12 is a multiple of both 4 and 3. So 3/4 becomes 9/12 because I multiplied numerator and denominator both by 3. 1/3 becomes 4/12 because I multiplied numerator and denominator both by 4. And I knew that because I asked myself 3 times what is 12? 3 times 4 is 12. So I need to do the same with the numerator. 1 times 4 is 4. Now I can subtract. So I do 2 minus 1 is 1, and then I do 9/12 minus 4/12 is 5/12. And 5/12, what? Meters. So the length of the other ribbon is 1 5/12 meter. On page 73 of Practice 3D, we just need to do 1 through 3 parts A only. And here we're multiplying a fraction times a whole number. And I'm going to help you think about all of these in a few different ways, but we'll start with a rule that we learned in class, that when you multiply a fraction times a whole number, you can just multiply the whole number times the numerator, and the denominator will be the denominator of the fraction. So 1/2 times 14 is just 1 times 14, or 14 times 1 over 2. which is 14. 14 times 1 is just 14, over 2, which is 7. So the answer is 7. Now, I could have thought about this much simpler. 1/2 times 14, that's a half of 14. Well, a half of 14 is 7. So I could probably do this in my head without having to multiply out. Remember we talked about 1/2 times 14 and 14 times 1/2. They both give you the same answer, but they're kind of different ideas. 1/2 times 14 means 14 groups of 1/2. So taking a half 14 times. You know that is 7 as well, because every 2 halves make a whole. So you're going to end up with 7. Or you can think of 14 times 1/2 as a half of 14, which is 7. So those are the different ways we talked about multiplication in class. Number 2, 30 times 4/5. So we can start by using our rule, which says we just take 30 times 4 over 5. So 30 times 4 is 120 over 5. Okay, so we need to simplify this. I know that 5 is a factor of both. So I know that 120 divided by 5 is actually going to be a whole number because it ends in a 0. Any number that ends in a 0 is divisible by 5. So I'm just going to divide it out. And I get 24. So the answer here is 24. So I want to show another way to think about this. And I'm going to use a bar model for this. This bar model represents the number 30. And I want to take 4/5 of it. 30 times 4/5. I want to take 4/5 of 30. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. The phone was ringing, so I paused the video. We're looking at 4/5 of 30. And I was trying to show it using a bar model. So if this bar represents 30 and I want 4/5 of it, I make 5 parts, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I take 4 of them. That would be 4/5 of 30. So each of these is a fifth of 30. 30 divided by 5 would be 6. So each of these is 6. So then 4/5 would be 4 of those, or 4 times 6, or 24. So I got the same answer both ways. I used our rule for multiplying the whole number times the numerator over the denominator, and I simplified that. I got 24, or I just drew it using a bar model, and I got 24. Let's do this last one both ways as well. 7/3 times 21. So that would be 7 times 21 over 3. I multiply the numerator times the whole number over the denominator. So 21 times 7, let's do that, is 147. So this is 147 over 3. Let's see if this number is divisible by 3. 1 plus 4 is 5, plus 7 is 12. 12 is divisible by 3, so we know 147 is divisible by 3. So I can divide that out, and I get 49. So the answer is 49. Now I want to go back to this step here, where we have 7 times 21 over 3. We can actually simplify before we do that multiplication. 21 over 3. We can simplify at this point. We haven't talked about this in class yet, but let's just illustrate it here. We can divide the numerator and denominator both by 3. We divide 3 by 3, we get 1. 21 we divide by 3, and we get 7. So we end up with 7 times 7, which is 49. So it would have been much simpler to simplify before we multiplied. Then we wouldn't have needed to do this long division over here. Now I want to show this using a bar model as well. So if our number is 21 and we're taking 7/3 of it, so we ask ourselves what 1/3 is. 1/3 of 21 is 7, because 7 times 3 is 21. So if we're taking 7/3, we're just taking 7 times 7, because we're taking, if this is 1/3 and we want 7/3, we take 7 of these. So our answer becomes 7 times 7, or 49. So that's just an illustration of how you can just reason this out. You can just say, well, I know what 1/3 of 21 is. It's 7. So 7/3 of 21 would be 7 times 7, or 49. So hopefully you can see that there are so many ways to think about these problems. You can use bar models. You can just multiply it out. You can just kind of think in your head, like, what's half of 14? Many different ways. If you understand the concept of fractions, then there's many ways to go about these problems.
Y-E-A-H. Yay for math!